your hands out!
Put your hands out! Hands out to side!
You've probably already seen this in the news, the shooting that happened in Akron, Ohio on Thanksgiving Day, where a police officer using a rifle shot and killed a 15-year-old high school freshman, later ID'd as Jasmine Tucker. This is what they said happened. Police said in a news release that 2 patrol officers were in a parked police cruiser in the Sherburne Hill neighborhood as they worked on a report from an unrelated incident. They heard gunshots nearby just after 11 p.m. Thursday and got out to investigate. Shortly afterward, the officers encountered the youth with a loaded firearm, police said. One of the officers fired, striking the youth, who was provided first aid and then taken to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead. That's what was reported back on the day after Thanksgiving. But now fast forward to yesterday, the body cam footage was just released. I went through it. Does it corroborate what the police initially said happened? No, not at all. Let's go through this and break it down.
We're still waiting on another shield.
All right, let's get the other shield up here.
Who else has a rifle?
I do.
All right, you want to get online with me?
Let's get rifles.
In the 1985 case of Tennessee versus Garner, the U.S. Supreme Court established that deadly force may be used by police only when necessary to prevent the escape of a known fleeing dangerous felon and when there is probable cause to believe that a suspect poses a threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. So this ruling effectively limits the use of deadly force to situations where there is an imminent threat of serious harm. The case law requires that reasonableness must be assessed from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, considering the rapidly evolving, intense circumstances officers often face, and so you look at the facts that the officer faced under the particular circumstances. Which brings us to the first problem that we have here. Despite the fact that this police department had a policy that all interactions are to be captured on body cam, from the very first second.
The policy is when we respond to a call, our officers should activate their body-worn camera.
The officer who shot Jasmine Tucker did not turn on his body cam.
The 2 officers who initially responded did not activate their body cameras upon exiting the vehicle.
So we really don't have any good look at it. All we have is the fact that his body cam automatically turned on, apparently just because of the presence of emergency lights in the vicinity. So by the time his body cam kicked on, it automatically saved the previous 30 seconds of video footage, which did include him shooting, but it has no audio, so we don't know what was said. And because he's holding an AR-style rifle right in front of his body cam camera, you can't even see Jasmine Tucker at all. I mean, at all. So we can't hear what the officer said or what Jasmine said. We can't hear what anyone else said, and we can't see Jasmine. There was a dash cam from one of the officers that actually caught the shooter shooting. But we have the same problem. It does not show Jasmine, and also we can't hear any audio of what's being said. We can hear the shots being fired. And that brings us to our next problem, which the body cam does actually show. The mayor of Akron held a press conference, and he acknowledged the fact that it's problematic that the officer involved in the shooting, or the 2 officers who were there at that time, did not turn on their body cams.
Last night, we released several videos from the incident. After viewing them, I am left with many serious questions. The 2 officers who initially responded did not activate their body cameras upon exiting the vehicle. At some point, the cameras were automatically activated due to the presence of a nearby cruiser with activated lights, and once activated, the cameras can automatically store 30 seconds of video without audio.
But also, after this kid was shot twice with a rifle, no emergency aid was rendered to him for a period of about 10 minutes.
In hindsight, the amount of time that expired between the shooting and the initiation of physical aid to Jasmine is deeply troubling to me. I want to be clear that any unreasonable delay by police officers in rendering aid is unacceptable and has no place in Akron.
As you'll see, the officers stood around while more officers arrived, and they screamed and shouted commands at this kid that they had just shot.
Put your hands out!
Put your hands out! Hands out your side!
He was reaching right with his right hand. Again, he was reaching with his right hand. Again, he was reaching with his right hand.
Hands out to your side, suspect.
Right here, stop right here. Put your hands out to your side!
Hands out to your side! Put your hands out your side!
Suspect, put your hands out to your side!
Do it now! Hands out your side! Put your arms out!
Suspect, put your hands out to your side!
Stay on him.
Suspect, put your hands out to your side! Suspect, put your hands out to the
Stay on him,
side!
stay on him.
Suspect, put your hands out to your side!
Does anybody have a shield?
Suspect, put your hands out to your side!
Suspect, put your hands out to your side!
Get your hands out to your sides! Do it now!
Keep giving commands.
Suspect, put your hands out to your side!
Put your hands out to your side!
Get your hands out to your side!
Suspect, put your hands out to your side!
Get your hands out your side!
What's up? What's up?
With all these officers on the scene, with all the body cams on the scene, we cannot now look and see what those officers were seeing. We know that they found a dead 15-year-old who had been shot with a rifle, but that leaves them in the situation where they can say, well, he was threatening them in some way. He wasn't obeying their commands. But as far as we know, it may have just been a lifeless body on the ground. It's crazy that we cannot see the scene. All we can see are the guns that these guys are holding. But they had just shot a 15-year-old, and they just basically are letting him bleed out. They're waiting for shields. I mean, give me a break.
Are we still waiting on another shield?
All right, let's get the other shield up here.
They're waiting for more rifles.
Who else has a rifle?
I do.
All right, you want to get online with me?
Get rifles.
And then eventually, they sort of stack up together. They form a line, and then they very carefully march forward 10 minutes after they shot the kid.
Please put your hands out to the side.
You got additional hands.
Who's probably already dead at this point. Constitutionally speaking, while there's not really a constitutional requirement that police officers themselves have to immediately render emergency aid to somebody that has been shot or who they just shot, there is a constitutional obligation to, at the very least, call for an ambulance and call for emergency medical professionals to arrive at the scene. Moreover, most police policies require that this be done. In this case, the chief of police in Akron spoke at the press conference, and he explained that they do have an obligation to render emergency medical treatment. However, they have to secure the scene first.
When officers respond to a scene, the first thing they need to do is assess the safety of the scene. After that assessment, if they believe that the scene is safe, then we go to rendering aid and calling for EMS.
And so it was acknowledged that in these videos, we can't see the scene that the officers are claiming was not yet safe.
That's a decision the officers have to make at that point, and I do not have information at this point to reference what they were doing there. I do know that they were calling for ballistic shields to approach, and that was what you heard on some of the video. I just can't I'm not going to speculate. I don't know right now.
So yet another problem with all these cameras that caught absolutely everything but what we need to see. Once this line of officers gets up to the person that they have there laying on the ground, the cameras finally show something that is the most important thing that is documented by these body cam videos. Remember, in the initial media reports, the day after Thanksgiving, the next morning, the next afternoon, the public was told via the news media that these two officers were just writing a report. They heard gunshots, they got out, started looking around, and then they encountered this person with a loaded firearm. Then they shot the person. That's what the news media was told. That's what the public was told. But does the body cam footage show that? When the officers get up to Jasmir, he's laying face down. Another good question is, where was he shot? Was he shot in the back? Was he running away? If so, he wasn't advancing with any threat towards the officers. He wasn't pointing anything at the officers. The first thing they do is turn him over. There's no gun in his hands. There's no gun laying out on the ground. There's no gun to be seen when they get up to the body. They handcuff him and they turn him over and began to search him. He has zippered pockets in his coat. One of the officers unzips the zipper pocket and he begins to rifle around in this apparently enormous pocket in his coat.
Something is right here. I'm not sure what it is. Gun. No.
Now, a gun was found in there. Doesn't immediately pull out a gun. He pulls out a number of other objects and then eventually finds a gun.
Flashlight.
You guys keep on giving me. You got any?
Yep. Got a gun. Got a gun. No.
iPad kit. What's that? We got to make it.
Got a gun.
Drop it next to it. Put it down. Put it down.
Don't flag yourself.
Yeah, just leave it.
This pocket is documented as having been zippered shut, and though a gun was found on the body in the coat pocket, it didn't appear to have been anything that had been out immediately before his death. It was under a number of other items. And why, you ask, is this the most important thing that we see in this footage? The initial story was that the officers encountered a subject with a loaded gun and they shot him. We see these stories every day all over the news, right? And if you have a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, F around, find out, he did have a gun, he was 15 years old, he shouldn't have had a gun, hold off on that for a second. If that gun was zippered in that coat pocket, under all that stuff, that is strong evidence that the officer who made the decision to pull the trigger multiple times, whose decision now has to be assessed for whether or not it's reasonable, never saw that gun. We have to look at what information the officer had available to him. One thing is there were two officers. One fired and one did not. That's actually an indication that firing was not reasonable. One officer didn't feel that it was reasonable enough to pull his trigger. Ironically, that was like the rookie cop, and the one who fired, I believe, had been there like 5 years. They said they heard shots. There was no call, there was no report that there was a gunfight. Heard shots. Could have been firecrackers. There was a police shooting, I believe that was in Ohio somewhere, where cops shot somebody because they heard a car backfiring and they thought that they were being shot at. So it would not be reasonable to go shoot somebody just because you heard gunshots. You heard gunshots. All right, maybe it was firecrackers. Maybe it was a car backfiring. Maybe this kid did have a gun and he was target practicing. I mean, you don't know. They get out to investigate. They see this kid. What about what they saw made it reasonable to pull the trigger and use deadly force and kill this kid with a rifle? Even if the kid had a gun in his pocket, if the officers never saw the gun, all they knew is they thought they heard gunshots, they saw a kid without a gun, that's going to be a tough sell to say that it was reasonable to shoot and kill that kid. Look at the distance between where the officers were standing when they shot him and where the kid's body was.
Please put your hands out to the side.
Remember, that kid was not under arrest at that point. They didn't see him fire a gun. Nobody told them he fired a gun. And if they did not observe a gun on him, they didn't have probable cause to arrest the kid, much less to use deadly force on him and kill him. This isn't the fleeing felon situation. This was a 15-year-old kid who, by the reports that I've seen, went to school, got good grades at school, was an active basketball player at school. I haven't seen any news that he was in a gunfight or had shot somebody or was involved in any criminal behavior. All we know is that he had this gun. Why? We don't know. Certainly you can't support the police executing people because they possess a gun, whether the government says it was illegal to do so or not. The important thing is if these cops never saw a gun, it's not going to have been reasonable to shoot him, especially not in the back while running away. If he had just carjacked somebody or was fleeing the scene of an armed robbery, that would be different. But here we have a 15-year-old, they don't know anything about him, and yet they shoot him first, then basically ask questions later. And that almost certainly is going to be unreasonable, any way you look at it. Since there's no good video footage, we're going to have to look at the officers' statements, if they give them. What do they say that they saw? Because we can hear what they're telling each other at the time, and nowhere does he say in his body cam that I have heard I saw a gun on the kid. No, he said his right arm was going somewhere.
He was reaching right with his right hand. Again, he was reaching with his right hand. Again, he was reaching with his right hand.
But he didn't say anything about seeing a gun. And this looks very unreasonable to me. It looks like a bad shoot. and there was no excuse not to just hit the button on his chest and turn the body cam on. It does appear to me to be a systemic issue. It's not just that one officer made a bad decision in hindsight, a split-second decision. It's like they felt they were in a war zone. Imagine even our troops in recent wars being able to shoot people in the back just for suspecting that they might have a gun. We had all sorts of restrictions on combat troops where they had to observe guns or they had to be shot at, all sorts of nonsense. And we're not talking about a combat zone, we're talking about Akron, Ohio. This is indicative of the sort of warrior mindset and training that places like Street Cop Training, who I did a video on, are putting in these officers' heads. They're making them jumpy on the trigger. We'll have to see how this plays out. If you want to follow along, subscribe both here and at the blog at thecivilrightslawyer.com. Also follow me on Twitter at JohnBryanESQ. Just because you think somebody might have a gun, the government does not get to execute them. Our rights don't end where your fear begins. Freedom is scary. Deal with it.